Just upcoming stuff. Next Thursday is a rare fifth Thursday. Diane and I were talking. There are no meetups that we have. First time like ever because it's a fifth Thursday. So there may be other meetups. I'm not sure, but all of us are working that day for once. July 7th, 2 weeks from today, Diane and Aaron, we took the developers meetup talking about building plugins for repeatable features. So how to build a plugin for FAQs, how to build a plugin for staff, for testimonials, yeah, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it should be a good one. Just learning how to build some simple plugins that you can then take and use on different projects over and over without relying on some third-party plugin that may or may not get updated and stuff. So that should be cool. 3 weeks from now on Thursday is Kathy Druin's meetup over at the East Side Government Center in the evening, talking about the 15 most annoying things about WordPress and how to fix them. So she had a good crowd last month, so that should be good there. The next week in here, actually in the small room that week, they have something going on in here. Isaac will be here talking about using advanced custom fields to build custom page templates, which again sounds like a mouthful, but it's meant for beginner, normal user kind of stuff to be able to build custom features without having to write code, using a plugin to help you kind of drag and drop and do some of that, so that should be good. And then the week after that, July 28th, we're talking about SEO that works, digging more into SEO, kind of a high-level, more business approach to it, and then getting into some tactical things you can do. So all those are up on Meetup, so you can go RSVP for those whenever you want. There's Miss Kathy here. We just talked about you and you missed it.
Oh
so.
gosh, it was wonderful, I'm sure.
About the 15 most annoying things about WordPress and how you're going to solve them for everybody. It's going to be wonderful.
Amy and John and Leslie. Those are my
We can help fill the rest of that out if you need. So.
Yeah. Some of them are people.
Yeah, I'd say most of them, yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll get started. Tom McFarland, you guys have probably read the thing. Owner of Pressware. He's done lots of various things along the years, and I'm not even quite sure what he's talking about, so you can take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, or good late morning, it's almost afternoon. I am excited to be here. I live over in Gwinnett County, and I participated in the WP Gwinnett meetup, and I've had the privilege of speaking at WordCamp Atlanta for about the past 3 years. So being able to come over to this side of the perimeter, I guess you'd say, has been fun. So thank you for having me. As you can tell from the title, it's Pressware, Publishing, and Passion, and that's super generic, and it's, what does this even mean? And I'm going to talk about each of those in depth, and we are going to talk about WordPress because it is a WordPress meetup, and there's 2 specific topics as outlined in the meetup about implementers and developers, so we will get to that. Before I get started, now there's a handful of people in here who I do recognize. I feel like they're at every WordPress thing that I've seen, so that's a good thing. But how many of you, or any of you in here, like first-time attenders? Awesome. Okay, so when I give presentations, or when I prefer to think of them as talks, I'm more into having a laid-back presentation versus a lecture. So at any point during the talk, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to raise your hand. And if it's something I can address right then, I will. Otherwise, I may say hang on till the end, because I'll also allow some time at the end to have a longer conversation. So before we get started, the thing that I always try to tell people is that for the 4 things that are core to my vocation, being Pressware, Publishing, Passion, and WordPress, all have to do with my family. And I don't know, some of you may have heard me talking when you first came in. It's a little dark, but everything that I do is for my family. I am married to my high school sweetheart. We met actually in 8th grade, but you're in that awkward stage. You get braces and you get weird clothes and whatever. So anyway, then you hit 9th grade and you're like, oh wow, I look a little better. She looks a lot better. So that's the one I want to date. Anyway, we started dating, and then we dated all the way through high school. We went to separate colleges, maintained a distance relationship, got married right after graduation, and have been together ever since. So it's been 5 years. We have 2 daughters. This is Josie. She's 4, and this is Piper. She's 2. And then we have 2 crazy terrier mutts who we have had we're big animal people, but we have had them since, I think, 3 months into our marriage. Everyone told us it was a mistake to get dogs that early. They were 10 weeks old. I disagree that it was a mistake, but that's just me. So that is, work is important, and I do think that it's important to do what you love or to love what you do as much as possible, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But everything I do is for them, because I absolutely adore my family. So, normally I think people try to save this to the end, but I do want to say at the beginning, thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much for having me. I love speaking to other people who are involved with WordPress on any level. I don't care if you're a user, I don't care if you're a developer, I don't care if you have no clue what you're doing and you just found it and you have some general questions. And the one thing I really like about Atlanta is that we have a pretty vibrant WordPress community. I know Kathy does things with it. I know that there are things down in downtown Atlanta. There's things in Gwinnett. There's things out here in Marietta. I think some people have tried to occasionally do something in Roswell. I don't know if it's gotten off, if it's actually been very consistent or not, but I try to keep tabs on it. And I think this year might have been the largest WordCamp Atlanta that we've had. So that's good, it's growing. So with that said, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about Pressware, publishing, and passion. So what does that even mean? Pressware is my company, and there's a story behind that that's relevant to WordPress, relevant to what I want to do, and it's relevant to the rest of the talk. So we're going to be talking about that. Publishing can be thought of, at this point it's synonymous with blogging, but depending on if you're doing it on a personal level, or you're doing it on a professional level, or you're doing it on a journalistic level, you're going to hear it referred to in different ways. Sometimes it's blogging, sometimes it's content marketing, and then sometimes it's journalism. But it all falls under the banner of publishing. And then finally, passion. This is a topic that I think is talked about on a lot of business blogs, and there's a lot of conventional wisdom around it, and there's a lot of I think there's some dangerous advice around it, at least in my experience. So I want to talk a little bit about that, though I am definitely interested to hear you guys' feedback as well. Secondly, when it comes to WordPress, there are normally two types of roles as it relates to building things with WordPress, or there's two types of roles that I like to classify. And these are implementers and developers. And then on the other side, as far as users, you have people who are running blogs. So they're writing at some regular interval. Maybe it's once a week, maybe it's every day, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's once a year. But everyone has an interval. And then you've got businesses that are running on it. And I'm going to talk about all of that. And as I said earlier, if you have a question at any point, feel free to raise your hand. We'll either chat about it then, or we'll just save it till the very end of the presentation. So first, Pressware is a company that I officially started when I was in college in 2007. It went by a different name, and I was offering a variety of different services. It wasn't just, actually at the time it wasn't focused on WordPress at all. It was focused on general web development, and it was focused on Ruby on Rails development. But when I went through and changed the name, all I had to do was update the name. I still have the same tax ID as I had in 2007. So as far as Uncle Sam is concerned, it's the same company. And that is where I am now. I focus exclusively on building solutions using WordPress. Now, solutions is broad. This is development, this is services, this is code reviews, and things that are tangentially related to that. I'll talk a little bit about that more in just a minute. But this is where I am now. But if I started doing something that was completely unrelated, I think it raises a question of how did I get from doing something so much more general, such as just general web development or working with other technologies like .NET and Ruby on Rails, and move over into WordPress. And I have found that people in the enterprise or that work for slightly larger companies always are they kind of give you this look. They say, oh, what do you do for a living? I work with WordPress. Why aren't you using a real technology? Whatever, you get used to it. And then you can have a fun discussion and describe it in as to why it's a viable alternative. Anyway, so my story with WordPress starts actually when I was at Georgia Tech. They needed some students that were in the College of Computing, or they wanted some students who were in the College of Computing to blog about their experience as a Georgia Tech student. Because it was essentially PR, free PR for the school. Hey, we'll set you up with this, you blog about it, we get free PR, and people see what it's like to be a day of life in a student. You can blog about what you're doing at school, you can blog about your internships, etc. So when I got set up with that, the most quote-unquote WordPress development I did was just hacking around with the core theme. I wasn't paying attention to anything about the WordPress community. I wasn't paying attention to anything with WordPress core. I wasn't even really paying attention to other themes or plugins that were out there. There were a handful of things that I wanted the blog to do, set it up to do it. When I needed to change, I would go in and modify the files. That's where the general web development stuff came in handy. And out of school, I worked for a major internet company. I was doing .NET development, and I worked for a few years as a software engineer, got promoted to a team lead, which I don't want to say I didn't like, because I do enjoy running a team and kind of managing. I don't want to say I enjoy managing people. That sounds whatever, but I enjoy working with a group of other people. But I really, really, really enjoyed engineering more than anything. Ever since I was 10 years old, I knew that I wanted to do something with computers, and ever since I was about 11 or 12, I knew I wanted to write software. So, anyway, I was working for that major internet company, and while I was there, I always knew that somehow out in the distance in my life, I wanted to be self-employed. I watched my dad start his company back in 1994. I was in a vastly different field. He is in what's called commercial storefront. So anytime you're in a commercial building and you see windows and frames and things like that, several stories, that's what he does. My brother will be probably taking over that business. If I was the person to install glass, your building would not have glass. So that was just not for me. I worked there before I could drive, and as soon as I was able to drive, I was out. So sorry, Dad. I loved, super proud of you, but your business is not my own. So I thought I would be about 35 or 40 before I was able to start my own business. I thought, okay, you need to get X amount in the bank, I need to get X amount lined up. We need to decide if we're going to start a family and things like that. But an opportunity presented itself about 30 and a half years into our marriage, and one day my wife looked over and she goes, if you want to quit tomorrow, I would be completely okay with that. Well, I'm the kind that has to sit there and think things through for probably far too long. And she's the one who's more of, I got a gut feeling, 99% of the time she's right. And so immediately I start kind of freaking out a little bit. And to be clear, at this time, I was working on contract work after work. And when it's just you and your wife, or you and your partner, or you and your spouse, or whatever, it's not that hard to have contract work after work. When you have kids and you have a life, it's a lot different. So, anyway, I go to work the next day, or I go to work that week, and one of those days that week, they tell me, we're setting you up to be spending several weeks in Chicago over the next few months, you'll be doing this, that, or the other. And I said, okay, I talked to my boss at the time, and I said, we need to talk. So I went in, and I said, I really appreciate everything you've done, you've been a fantastic boss, but this is essentially my 2 weeks notice. I was planning to wait actually about 2 weeks more, but he was kind of caught off guard, but it was the best choice. It was the best choice for me, and it was the best choice, I think, for the business. I've kept up with some of the people I worked with, and they've continued to do great, and people are continuing to have, they continue to do great. They have people that are happy, and I'm happier than I've ever been as far as work is concerned. So, as I mentioned, I started off doing Ruby on Rails, and that, for those of you who aren't developers, that is a framework on which you can build web applications. People think that WordPress can't be used to build web applications. It can be. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a general sense later on. But I was using, I was also building PHP-based applications or PHP-based websites, and I was doing light WordPress work. And when I say I was doing light WordPress work, I mean I was basically maintaining a public journal on the web of things that I was learning as someone, as a software professional in the real world post-graduation. Basically, I was blogging about what I was learning, and there were all these adults ahead of me being like, I already know this stuff. But consistency pays off, and I will talk about blogging, and I'll talk about why consistency pays off as well. But somewhere along the line, I began to pare down my PHP work, because the amount of requests that I was having was primarily around Ruby on Rails and WordPress. And then Ruby on Rails, which I think is a fantastic framework, the way that they do releases became very tough to maintain web applications that I had maintained for clients over time, because when they would release a new version, it could break what I'd already built for someone, it could break dependencies, and so a site could be out of date. When you update it, certain things like user authentication could be broken, and it would just, when you have a handful of clients built on this stuff, you have this mess that you have to handle, and suddenly you're stepping outside of development and you're into maintenance mode. And we all have to do that, even with WordPress. But if you can minimize the amount of time you're doing with maintenance, I think the happier you'll be, because it's a lot like janitorial work, in that you're just, but it's like unnecessary janitorial work. Is, why don't you use the trash can rather than just drop it all on the floor? So anyway, I made the decision, despite the fact that the volume of work that I had was not necessarily what it should be, I made a decision to begin scaling back on Ruby on Rails. So rather than just drop it completely, I scaled down my clients one at a time. And for everyone I scaled down, I tried to pick up someone with WordPress. And it worked. And then eventually I was able to work exclusively with WordPress. And I found myself being happier, being more fulfilled, and being more interested. Secondly, I found myself being very interested in applying general software engineering techniques in the context of building things with WordPress. Now, when I talk about WordPress and building things for it, there's a lot of things that can come to mind. You have themes, you have plugins. Some people will say they have web applications. Some people are even building mobile applications built on WordPress. That's outside the scope of this talk, but it is out there. And I urge you to check out something called Pressware.com, apppresser.com. That shows you how people are building some web apps with WordPress. But outside of client work, I also began to experiment with products. So I had some, for a while, I was working with a team, and we were working on a theme that became very popular, and it was a really good, I worked with them for about three and a half years. It was great, but we ultimately decided to go different ways. And when I say we went different ways, I mean one person went and started a motorcycle garage, one person's out in San Francisco, and one person now works for a major nonprofit here in the Atlanta area. So it wasn't like we went in separate ways in the same industry. We went separate ways as far as you could go. I still keep in touch with most of them, so it was not like one of those things that you would see in a documentary about it. This team was amazing. They were doing great stuff, and then the worst thing happened. It wasn't like that at all. We just found we found that what we were doing was not as fulfilling as we would like. Except, I still really, really felt this draw and this passion around WordPress. And so, the reason that I began to focus or continue to focus on WordPress is because aside from doing custom development for other people, I was able to start building things like plugins. And I was able to start building custom solutions for people and offering custom services for people like code reviews and things like that. And what that did was it exposed me to the fact that it didn't just have to be a service-oriented business. You could do products. Now, if you've ever done products for WordPress, but in any industry, you have the product, you launch it, and it's exciting, and then the rest is going to be customer support, and it's going to be maintenance. And if you have the right people or the right personality type for that, it's no big deal. But if you're like me, I don't mind doing customer support, but it is super draining. So I always try to make sure I have someone who is available and interested to help me with things like that. And then lastly, there's publishing. And we talked about it could be blogging, it could be content marketing, or it could be journalism. I'm no journalist. But I do blog daily. And I will, when we start talking about passion and publishing, I'll go into more detail about that. But I blog daily specifically about WordPress resources, about how to do things within WordPress and then about software development techniques that can be applied in the context of WordPress. I will also share, I also tend to share resources. It can be sites, it can be podcasts, it can be plugins, it can be tools that are useful for anyone who's working with WordPress. But as we continue to talk a little bit about Pressware, there's three things that I have learned as someone who is admittedly young in business. I'm not going to stand up here as someone that maybe you would see on Shark Tank, who is in the upper echelon of business, who is way up above the rest of us. But when it comes to customers and clients, and I know some of you in here either work for an agency or you run an agency or anything like that, if you have anything to add, that's great. Here's what I have found to be true. One, when it comes to your clients or your customers, if you have a product, don't make any assumptions when you're talking about them from the project outset. I have found that can be extremely dangerous if you assume that, I don't want to say if you assume they know what they're talking about, but if you assume that what they're saying is something you understand, there can be a breakdown in communication. And so I always ask a lot of questions because I kind of want to excavate what are they really asking for? What is the problem they have and what can I bring, or can I even bring the solution they're looking for? I have had people tell me before, I just want to get started, I don't want to keep answering questions. That's fine, I'm probably not the best service provider for you. That happens a small amount of time, but if you tell me that you want something and you don't want to answer any questions about what I'm trying to understand your entire problem domain, I don't know how I'm supposed to provide you a solution that you're even going to like. So I try to empathize with where they are. They have a pain point, they're frustrated. I want to be able to let them know, hey, it's cool, it's going to be fine, but we've got to uncover this problem. We've got to get some parameters around it. Then comes understanding the problem. And this is where working in any software-based industry, but with WordPress specifically, can get really exciting because you can constantly learn about other industries. Case in point, I have a client right now who is in the molding industry. When I say molding, I mean type of crown molding or something that you would see along the bottom of the floors in your house or around the threshold of doors in your house. I didn't know anything about that industry, and I didn't have any interest in knowing anything about that industry. But now I know I don't say I know so much. I know so much more than I ever did or ever thought I would know about the industry, that when they come to say, hey, we have a 3/4 inch, this, that, or the other, I know exactly what they're talking about. I know exactly what type of CAD file to pull up, and I can tell them where a problem would exist or whether or not we can render something as they want. So this is something that I find exciting. The same thing can apply to any industry in which you're trying to solve a problem for someone. Now, this is where the roles of the implementers and developers come into play, and I want to have more time to dive into each of those roles because developers are the kind of people who I would expect to really dive in and try to understand the problem and understand the industry and things like that. Implementers I would expect to understand a problem, but they wouldn't necessarily have to, somewhat pun intended, codify the solution to whatever the industry might be. Third are feedback loops. Now, there's generally two types of ways in which I have found people solving problems for other people. In one scenario, a person comes up to you and says, hey, I need this built. And then you say, okay, great, I'll take care of that. You disappear for 4 or 5 weeks. You come back, okay, it's done, check it out. Well, this isn't what I expected. Where's feature X? Where's feature Y? Where's feature Z? How come this bug is happening? Where do I click to add this? All of that can be alleviated through the use of small feedback loops. And so what I do is that whenever I receive a project, I then, ideally they should have a specification or a requirements document, and I'm not talking about something that's super formal. It doesn't need to be 91 pages long. You can send it to me in an email. But the idea is that then I take that and I break it down into as many subtasks as possible. And then I group those subtasks in ways that seem, based on my understanding of the problem, to be conceptually related. And then I take those group of tasks and I put them in a milestone. At the end of a milestone, which I try to keep at about 1 week, being 7 days, not 5 business days, but 7 days, and say, okay, in 7 days I will have a response, or I'll have the first milestone ready for you to test. Here's what you can expect. If I have any questions along the way, I will let you know. And then at the end of that milestone, they see what I've done. They'll say, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. This is close, but we need to tweak this, that, or the other. Or they'll say, this isn't working like I thought it would. And so from there, you're able to iterate on just that one milestone until it's polished. And then you move on to milestone 2 and 3 and milestone N. And with those small feedback loops, you don't have these big bang releases where you're plagued with problems from the outset. You have this solution that has been tested and evaluated from the very beginning, and that goes a long way in saving a ton of refactoring and retroactive development on the back end of a project. And then finally, you just repeat. Literally, what is it? Rinse and repeat. You do it for each milestone. You do it for each project. And I'm not saying that, I'm not going to stand up here and say, here are the tools you should be using, and here are the methodology you should be using. I'm just saying that when you are able to break things down into milestones and get feedback pretty quickly, it really can benefit the speed or the rate at which you're getting feedback from your users, and it improves the quality of their solution. Next is the technical side. So a lot of this stuff that you see up here, some of you are going to be nodding along. This is exactly what you should be doing. So first, back up your data. And I'm not necessarily just talking about yours. I mean, I assume anyone who's building a site or building an app for someone has a way in which they're backing up all their files. Because if a fire happens, or a power outage happens, or a hard drive fails, or who knows what, you still have access to all of their information that you can restore to a machine, and that you can then pick up where you left off. Now, granted, you might be out a few hours while you set up your new machine or restore the project, but you haven't lost anything. Next, source code control is something that developers will use as a way to track every single change to every single file that happens in every single project. At least they should. And what this does is, hey, I've pushed out milestone 1, please go check it out. Or no, let's say I've pushed out milestone 2, please go check it out. Oh, this looks great, except something in milestone 1 is broken. Can you look into that? And what source code control has let you do is it will allow you to literally look at 2 files and see what has changed. And then from there you can say, oh, I see I changed a function here. It was doing this in milestone 1, and here in milestone 2 it's doing this. I should have fixed that. Then you can literally roll back. You can restore the original functionality, and then when you work on milestone 2, you can either write a new function or improve the existing function and let it continue to move forward as the client wants. So the general overarching principle that I try to tell people is with source control, you're not going to nail the solution to a problem once. And having checkpoints throughout your development is really helpful because you can always rewind. And if you have multiple people working on a project, multiple people can be working on different features, and then you can merge them all together and then release that to the customer. So it provides a lot of great features. It provides a lot of great sanity checks, and it provides you basically a paper trail of everything that's happened in your project. And finally, I think that from the technical side, having a consistent workflow is extremely important. Now, what I mean by that is whatever your tools are, whatever your IDE is, whatever your suite of debugging plugins are, whatever your debugging software is, having that consistent set that you apply to every single project is so important because it sets a level of expectation for your team and it sets a level of expectation for your clients, even if they don't know it. Because if you have a great client and then they refer you to someone else and you have a different workflow, that second client is going to have a different experience than the first one. They're going to, hey, you referred me to these people, but this is not at all like what you described. But if you have consistency in how you gather your feedback, set up your milestones, manage your source control, and even roll out your changes, roll out your updates, then they're going to have the same experience. They're going to say, yeah, I'd see why you referred them. Or maybe they still will think, hey, I'm probably not going to refer them. Because sometimes your workflow is just not going to jive with theirs, and that's just the nature of different personalities. Now, the last thing before we talk about publishing is I want to talk about the business side, because and the reason I hesitated to even put this slide in here. However, over the last few years, I've noticed a lot of people have really wanted to get into WordPress either as a side business, as a freelancer, or they wanted to do something around forming their own business, or they had an idea and they wanted to form their own business, but they weren't sure how to do it. And I'm not here to give legal advice, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you the three biggest things that have helped me that I wish I had done from the very beginning. One, you have to ask the question, should I form a company or not? And the thing is, this is more of a question for a CPA or for someone that is a lawyer. Sometimes a company doesn't have to be formed. You can be a DBA or doing business as, but once you reach a certain threshold of income, that's where having a business comes into play, because it can protect your assets. And yeah, there's certain things around taxes and things like that that will come, but up until you are making a certain amount of money, you may not need an LLC or an incorporation or anything like that. Speaking of CPAs, the very best thing that I have done for my business is to hire a CPA. My first year in business, I did not have one. I was just keeping the books myself. I was not filing. I was just setting money aside to pay my tax bill at the end of the year. I was not paying quarterlies. I was not doing withholdings. And man, the tax bill for your first year in business, when it's your only company, it is a punch in the gut. And luckily, I was setting things aside to save it. But now, every single week, I will be doing expense reports. I will be handling payroll. I will be handling categorizing credit card statements, things like that. And at the end of the month, I send that to my CPA. She sends me a copy of how she has set up the books. I can compare that to what I've done in my bookkeeping software. She files the taxes, tells me if I owe anything, and then at the end of the year, all that stuff's done. So I get the paperwork. And because she's done that for me all through the year, when it comes time to doing personal taxes, she knows what I've done. So once again, it's literally in December or early in January, rather than waiting until April, I can have my taxes done and I can be done with that headache. And so for the few $100s that it might cost a month, it is so worth it. And finally, I say that you should have a dedicated communications channel, because we, right now, and I don't know if this is as prevalent in other industries. I tend to think it is, but we're never offline. And that's okay. I'm not chastising that. I have my phone or my computer with me just as much as the next person. But when I'm on vacation or if I'm out with my kids and my family, I don't want to have work email late into the night. If I'm watching a movie, I don't want my phone buzzing with work email, and I don't want to get out of a movie with a work email. So have a separate email account and have it set up in your email program so that you can turn it off. You know, personal email is one thing. Maybe you've got a babysitter or a sick family member. You need certain communications channels on all the time. But then if you've got work-related stuff, stop at 5, 5:30, or 6, or whatever, and pick it up the next morning. And let your clients know that that's how you work. Don't, because some people don't work that way, and that's okay. My in-laws are, I have a few in-laws who are doctors, so they're on call. So they are working what seems like all the time. But we don't have to be that way. We don't have to be on call unless you're like managing a rack of servers or things like that. So set up a dedicated communications channel, and you can do this with your phone. You can set up a Google Voice number. And so if they call that number, you can forward it during certain hours or send it a voicemail. And with email, if it's set up a filter, if it's coming to my work email, snooze it until tomorrow. But just do what you can to make sure that you have clear lines, because otherwise you're always working. And I think you might have a hard time if you bill hourly. How are you going to bill for emails at 9:30 at night? That's going to look like a weird line item. It's just my personal opinion, but and I haven't always been that way, but the older that I've gotten and the more my family's grown, that's what I've found it to work. Okay, so that's the business stuff. That's what I do for a living. That's how I run it. That's how I manage it. But I know not everyone in here is running a WordPress-based business, and you may not even be interested in that. But let's talk about blogging, because if you're involved in WordPress, then you are definitely familiar with blogging, or maybe you're just familiar with content management. So in this context, despite the fact that we've talked about 3 different ways in which people use WordPress, we're going to be talking about blogging. We're going to say publishing is synonymous with blogging. And so before I move forward, what I'm curious about is how many of you in here have a blog? It doesn't have to be updated frequently. All right, cool. But I always just like to know so that I can tailor the next part of this conversation around that. Because if nobody's in here blogging and I'm talking about blogging, and it's like, what's the dork up here that's writing for the internet to read? So cool, that's awesome. I'm a big proponent where I think that if someone has the time, people should start a blog. And so anyway, I blog, as mentioned, I blog daily all about software development and WordPress. Now when I started, I was in 7th grade, and I was updating a static HTML site about what I had done. And you can think about what a 7th grader would be writing about. I mean, it's that I have some of those things saved, and I read them, and I cringe, and I have to close it because it makes me feel so awkward. But this was before blogging engines had come out, and so I was literally updating a static HTML site, putting the timestamp on it, and then uploading it. My dad found out that I was doing this, and so he was checking the timestamps on the files versus the timestamp I was putting under the title, and says, Tom, there is no reason you need to be sneaking out of bed at night to write an HTML file. Because it was like 2:30 a.m. I would wait until everyone in my house was asleep. I'd go down to the basement, and while some kids were playing video games, and I did play video games, while some kids were getting up, sneaking around playing video games, or doing who knows what on the internet, I was getting up to blog, and that was my first foray into daily blogging. But then Blogspot hit the scene. It was this whole platform. Oh, there's a title, you can set a date and categories, and you can insert images and video. Okay, I'm swapping over to this. So I got into that, and this was before Google acquired it, renamed it the Blogger, and everything like that. But and then shortly thereafter, I had one of those Verizon camera phones, and it was a flip phone, and I had set it up so I could text a picture to my blog and show pictures, and it was like the original Instagram. And I got my friends to do it, which was so fun because I could see like, oh, they're hanging out at the pool today, and this grainy, small picture, but that's cool. And you would take pictures of, still take pictures of really interesting stuff. We also take pictures of dumb stuff. Things haven't changed that much. But then WordPress came along, and as I mentioned, it was in college. And I have tried since WordPress, I've tried Movable Type, I've tried LiveJournal, I have messed around with Expression Engine, I've tried so many different platforms. I've looked at Ghost, I've always come back to WordPress, I've always come back to it for a variety of reasons. Now, my motivation for blogging is that I want to keep public notes of my experiences in building things with WordPress. Now, I do have some other categories like I'll share when I have spoken at meetups or at conferences. I'll share my slides, and I will also share when I've written for other sites and things like that. But the 2 biggest things for me are that I want to educate others based on what I've learned to hopefully short-circuit their journey from, hey, I need to do this, I don't know how, someone has shared how, so I can learn this. But the flip side of that is that I can also educate myself, because there are people out there who are far smarter and they have far more experience. And so then they hop in the comments, hey Tom, this looks great, I see why you're doing this, I used to do it that way, but here's a different way in which I have found to do it. And then I'll learn from them. And that's really awesome. Now, there are times where I have to moderate comments because sometimes there's just jerks. And the blog itself receives about 80,000 to 90,000 hits a month. That is what I would consider semi-modest for the amount of time that I have been blogging. But I'm not so worried about hits. I'm not worried about, some people will pay for Instagram followers and Twitter followers and stuff like that. But I'm not interested in that. I don't do any advertising. It's just I blog, and if people visit, that's great. And if they comment, that's better. And then it's totally it's the long game. It's the marathon, not a sprint. And I don't have a goal for how many hits I want. I know some businesses, they have those metrics, and I completely understand understand why. But for this type of property, it's not really anything that I'm set out to do. But the reason that I think everyone should blog is because it affords opportunities that would not otherwise be offered to you. So for example, it gives you opportunities to speak meetups or at conferences. Were it not for my blog, I don't know if I would have been able to speak at WordCamp Atlanta. I don't know if I would be speaking at other meetups. I don't know if I would be able to have, I've done webinars for some people. I don't know if I have that ability because there would be nothing about me online to qualify any of my credentials. And that's one thing that blogging has led to. Secondly, it has allowed me to start up 2 other side projects or verticals of your business or whatever terminology that you want to use. But I'm doing something called Start Here. Now, last year I did something called, earlier this year I did something called the first version, and it was kind of I'm going to test the waters. And it was a closed membership site in which you paid to be a member, and there were benefits that you would get for, it wasn't just like, hey, pay to read this content. It wasn't like that. It was content, there were podcasts, there were deals on WordPress-related software, et cetera, and it was meant to see, hey, are there people out there who want to be professional WordPress developers, but they're not sure where to start? And so I called it the first version because I needed to search for a domain name one night. Well, this is the first version that I've done this. So this first version available, it was available, ordered it, registered it, set it up. And it worked, and it went really well. So I'm going to be doing it again starting in August 5th is when it starts. So starthere.tommcfarland.com, there's a landing page for it, and it is, Start Here seems to make more sense. Hey, if you want to be, if you are an aspiring WordPress professional or aspiring WordPress developer, start here. And it's got a plethora of articles that I release on all of the different things that are out there for you to learn, to know, and to get better at. Still has a lot of the same deals. I've got partnerships with some other people who are focusing on JavaScript in WordPress and who are focused on object-oriented programming in WordPress. And there's just a lot of really generous people who are giving discounts on things like that. It has allowed me to spin up a second part of my business that I call Pressware plugins. And because I'm passionate about publishing and because there's certain nuances about WordPress that annoy me. Yes, ma'am.
So when you said that you're not concerned about the hits, so do you think the 80,000 or 50,000 plus hits that you got to your blog is the reason why you were able to get speaking engagements? And because I do understand not being concerned about that, not being concerned about hits, and there's like tons or millions of us to go, yeah, I don't get it hits, so that's why I'm not concerned. But getting the hits has opened the doors, right?
That's
okay.
right.
All right.
So that's a good point. So when I say that I don't care about the hits, what I mean is I don't have a strategy set up or like a campaign in Google Analytics saying let's do this, that, or the other in order to bump it up 10 more thousand. If I was to see a dip, I would be concerned. What am I doing wrong? But now that it's at a certain level and it's afforded me, it's also my primary sale. I've never had to do a cold call because people have said, hey, I saw your blog. So to say that I don't care about a metric is not an attempt to be disingenuous. It's just to say that I'm not focused on reaching a certain metric, but I am also not set out to, I don't want to lose readers, but that I didn't set out to create this blog that people are reading to afford opportunities. It was kind of one of those things that as it took off, I noticed, oh, people are taking notice. And so now that it's there, I care that there's a baseline, but I don't care, plus or minus 10,000 per month. That's okay. So, Pressware plugins. So, because I enjoy blogging, and because there are certain shortcomings in WordPress that, I started to create these little small tools that would streamline my whole process. Because I have a process every morning when I sit down to blog. I have this entire set of things that I go through. I wrote these plugins to help automate some of it or to help streamline some of it. And I shared it with a friend of mine who is also a daily blogger, and he wanted it. And I thought, well, maybe there's some type of market for this. I don't know. So I started to hire a designer and then started to try to put these things together in the right way, not hacking them together where I'm the only one doing them. And then I have 2 in our WordPress plugin repository right now. There's about 4 more in development. I'm not sure they're always going to stay in the WordPress plugin repository, but I at least wanted to kind of announce them, get the word out and things like that. So they're super small tools, but they're basically made to fix one little nuance here and there that hinders the day-to-day minutia or the tediousness of writing a blog post. And then finally, I have been invited on to speak on several podcasts, and I always am. I never cease to be super appreciative of this because the people who ask me to come on, I feel like either I've admired them from afar or I've read their blog, and I'm more of a lurker. I don't comment on a lot of people's blogs. I don't follow that many people on Twitter, but I really enjoy the content that these people are putting out, and they'll reach out and say, hey, would you like to be on the podcast? And immediately I say, yeah, I'd love to. Can you please provide me an outline of what you're going to talk about? Because I don't like flying blind. I don't want to get in there with someone who I think is just this, they're so smart. I've got all this respect for them. And I get up there and I'm the bumbling guy who, I press buttons and I blog and, I just hit buttons on my keyboard until something happens. I want to be able to speak intelligently about the things that I do, and I want to be able to contribute something to their audience because they invited me on, and these people are basically lending me their time to listen to what we have to say. So from there, I want to swap over to WordPress. And before we talk about passion, because it all is going to come full circle here in just a minute, I want to talk about the platform that we all use, or the application that we all use that we have in common. Yes.
Before you went on to that, I want to say one more thing about speaking. Well, 2 things about speaking. One is your blog is why you're here today, because I follow it, and not necessarily the content per se. I mean, I've seen you speak. I know you're a sharp guy, but just like I kept seeing it come and saying, wow, you stay top of mind, I guess is what that is. And also regarding how numbers don't matter, the fact that you publish a full RSS feed versus a partial one probably has contributed to you being here today as well, because I'm one of the old people that still follows RSS feeds.
Yeah.
But I read your posts because they come in. I don't necessarily visit your site, so you're not worried about getting the hit per se. But I still read your content every day versus people that say, well, I'll just do the snippet so that way they have to click through. More often than not, I'll say, I don't have time for that, and I don't read it. So your stuff I read more because of that, but it's because you don't care about traffic per se.
Right.
It's worked out well for you.
Thank you for what you said. And the thing is, I'm one of those old school who also still uses RSS. And it's interesting that you mentioned that because I've been trying to do a form of thing where I do a full RSS feed, but if you subscribe via email, you just get the excerpt.
Okay.
I have had no complaints about it, but I haven't also seen a huge conversion on hits since just doing an excerpt via email. So at the end of the summer was when I was going to end the experiment and just turn it full on, full post on, because if people are asking to read things in their inbox, they're not asking, hey, put it in my inbox and yank me back into my web browser, So, excuse me. So that's exactly why I never just did an excerpt for RSS. I never have, and if people have it in a digest, I think that's how they have opted to read it.
Yeah.
So, with that said, WordPress is everything. WordPress is the one thing that we all have in common in this room. No matter if we're bloggers, no matter if we're interested in getting started with it, no matter if we're programmers, or no matter how we use it in our jobs. And for me, it is a hobby, it is a job, it is a passion. I will show you how they all fit together a little bit later. But how people use WordPress is going to depend on the role in which they have, either in their jobs or in their hobbies, or what they're doing outside of their jobs. Some of us will be blogging. Some people use it for content management. I've seen some people using it as like a learning management system. I've seen some people using it as a CRM. I've seen some people using it as, there was one really, there's a service out there called Happy Tables. It's a restaurant engine. People have converted it into using it as a way to manage their restaurant website and menus and things like that. I see people using it for websites, even if they're static websites. They don't really even update the pages that much. And then some people are now building full-on web apps on top of it. And so you will have WordPress running as the foundation, but you would never know it's WordPress because they have built an entire dashboard on top of it, and they've built a front end on top of it that the person, when they log in, they'll never see the WordPress dashboard. The administrator might, but the people who are managing the site will never see it. And so I personally do think that it's I don't want to say that it's just that it's perfect, because WordPress is a legacy application. It's 13 years old. There's a lot of old code in it. There's a lot of new code in it. And I think when people, especially developer types, when you recognize that it's a legacy application, it gives you perspective on why certain decisions are made in each new version of WordPress. And when you can kind of accept that, but you realize your hands aren't necessarily tied as a developer to that legacy application reputation, that's a mouthful, then you can still continue to do things that are a little bit more advanced on top of WordPress. But with that said, so why WordPress? So the way that I summarize it for myself is that blogging is a hobby for me. It is much like playing the guitar or reading or doing whatever type of hobby you have outside of work. And though blogging is part of my day-to-day, so is playing the guitar. And I know that there might be some lines that are blurred in that blogging has afforded me the ability to speak at events like this. It's not the way that I make my living. It's really a labor of love. It's a hobby. Now, development is my job, and it's just like anyone else's vocation, it's another job. I've just chosen to build mine on top of WordPress, as we saw earlier. And finally, WordPress is the vehicle through which I can be passionate about both. And passion is a really hot topic. I think I'm seeing it in a number of different blogs, articles, magazines, essays, whatever. Especially with the, and I hesitate to even use this word, but with the millennial generation, there's this whole notion around passion in your job that I put it under scrutiny. I don't want to say I'm cynical about it, but I am going to talk about that in depth here in just a little bit. But when it comes to WordPress and it comes to building things with WordPress, there are two roles in the WordPress economy. And I define them as implementers and I define them as developers. And implementers, I don't view one as any better than the other. I'm not trying to throw the development community under the bus, but one observation that I have made is that developers can tend to be very arrogant about what they know and what they can do. And it can be offensive, and it is a huge turnoff, and I'm saying this as a developer and as someone who is embarrassed by the reputation that some of us have. Secondly, implementers seem to be a little bit more personable because they seem to care more about the people they're working with. So if there's a way to marry the reputation that implementers have with what developers do, I think that we would be in a really sweet place. Will that ever converge? I don't know. But I know that I can try as myself to do the best I can. So this does raise the question of, are there other roles? And I think that there might be. We've talked about content marketers. For their company, they might use WordPress, but that doesn't fall under implementers or developers. That would fall under users. And we could probably talk about this ad nauseum and get really fine-grained and fine-tuned in this. But for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to hang out with implementers and developers. So how do I define implementers? A short list, and this is not, again, it's short, it's not all encapsulating, but I see implementers as technically savvy people who are well-versed or have a deep knowledge of the various hosts that are out there. They understand how to use WordPress. They're power users. Maybe they know some CSS and HTML. Maybe they know some PHP. They are well-versed in what is considered a high-quality theme and a poor-quality theme. They're able to identify why you would want to use something and why you wouldn't. And the same thing is about plugins. They know what plugins to avoid, what plugins you should use, why one will bring you some type of metric of success or some level of success, and why others can be more damaging. They know how to avoid, or they know where not to go to get things to help you build your site, and they know where to go to get your site. They know people who are popular in building things and have a good reputation, and they know who doesn't have a good reputation. And so these are people who are able to build a site or build a solution where other people using all off-the-shelf software. You know, you think about what you do virtually when you download plugins and themes. It's like walking into an old Office Depot and saying, okay, I need this box of software, I need this, I need this, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this. Except we're not necessarily paying thousands of dollars for this software. Some of it's free, some of it might be $100, some of it might be $500, whatever. And that's a whole licensing topic for a different discussion. But the purpose is that these are people who are technically savvy, who can help you build a site using off-the-shelf software, that they may not necessarily be able to build whatever it is that you have in mind from the ground up. And that's where developers come in. I see developers as people who are responsible for building custom solutions. Now, these custom solutions can include themes, and that also oftentimes will bring in a designer. They can build plugins, some can build web applications, and some can do even more. They can write scripts that will be responsible for handling multiple WordPress installations across an array of servers that are distributed about through the United States. I mean, it can get really deep, and even that can be subclassed into like IT and things like that. But the way that I see it at a high level is developers are those who can take a concept and turn it into a functional product, starting with nothing but WordPress, the idea, and then use code to bring the whole thing to life. And that's the difference. Implementers will take off-the-shelf software and assemble it and hand it off, and developers will take essentially something from nothing and then be able to produce the end result. So ultimately, we can say that each solves a different problem, but in the larger WordPress economy, they're both needed. Because there are going to be some people who they need a site, but they don't need to pay a developer tens of thousands of dollars to provide them a solution. When an implementer, not to say that implementers are cheaper, some aren't, but when an implementer can sit there and identify what's needed and do it arguably more quickly with a lot less of the feedback loops that we were talking about and things like that. But again, to drive it home, I don't see either being better than the other. I see them being as complementary. It just depends on what you want out of your site. Now, before we talk about the last product, or the last part being passion, I'm curious to know what you guys' experiences are with respect to WordPress developers and implementers. I know you've got opinions because I saw some of you nodding and shaking your head.
There's a lot of
I
overlap.
think there are a lot of us who are kind of in the middle, who kind of span that. And one of the things I love about WordPress is I'm a coder, and I come from a coding background, so I guess I'm a developer. But WordPress gives me a lot of tools that I don't have to recreate, and that's awesome. So I do a lot of implementing, and only do the development when I can't get it done easily for what's available.
Yes, and I think that's really good because I think there's a level of developer maturity that comes with that, because I see that as being pragmatic. It's like, why would I reinvent the wheel? If there's a solution or a library that's out there that I can use, I'm not going to write it myself just to prove that I can. The client doesn't care about that, you know?
No, I've already done that.
Yeah,
Years
exactly.
ago, yeah.
And I see some people still stuck in that phase of, I'm going to build the whole thing. And I think, why? You know, I mean, I used to be that way. I'll sit here in front, I'll tell everyone in any talk, I used to be that way. But that was more about me wanting to prove to myself that I could do it. But yeah, that's a really good point, that there is a hybrid that exists.
I don't think there's a flat line between one or the other, because a lot of the people I know who would classify themselves as implementers know an awful lot of stuff.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because I've seen them doing, like, they'll go in and they know enough, especially with respect to front end, they can tweak enough things in templates to adjust these things here and there for the clients. What about the rest of you?
I'll speak. I think my husband's a developer. developer, and I was never interested, but because he has all the books around, I purposely stepped over them using the door stops or whatnot. But as an implementer, I find some of, it's easier to do, the HTML to get this done and when I can't think of something, or if I don't want to go through the pages of plugins, I'm like looking next page, okay, I can just do that, so I'm not an in-between. I'm definitely an implementer. I'm fine with that. I find it easy to do some of the HTML things just because I've seen the books around, but I also found implementers to be nicer to me, but that's just me.
Yeah. Well, that's the, I've had developers, well, like I said, I have found implementers to be that way. I mean, I have my peers, they're jerks to me, but yeah, it's an interesting observation, and it's something that it's something that I've started to ask at a number of different meetups, because it's something that I was hearing people kind of murmur about, and then you get to a point where you can just ask, what about you? What do you think?
I think I have also observed the kind of developer versus implementer thing, and I think it's really important for designers to not feel as less than, because there's a lot of developers who can't design their way out of a paper bag.
That's exactly right.
And that's also not, great for the end user. So everybody has their role, and I think the more that you can cross-train, the better, but it doesn't make one better than the other.
I agree completely, because I'm one of those who, I tried for years to design my way out of a proverbial paper bag. No, I'm not focused on what I'm good at, and then I'm going to let someone else focus on what they're good at. And when you do that, you can create an overall, general, better result. And I mean, I know I'm fortunate to know, different people have different tastes, obviously, but when it comes to designers, there's about 3 off the top of my head who I will always ask, hey, do you have time for this? Do you have time for this? I've never regretted it, because what they're capable of doing in design, there's no way I would have ever been able to do it. So just like I think developers can take, or implementers can take a concept and produce a tangible result, a functional result, designers can sit there and create this branding, for lack of a better term, around, they can capture this idea and then create a rendering of it that is just amazing. So anyone else? Okay, cool. So I'm going to go on and talk about passion. And this is the one that, like I said, I'm very skeptical about this. I hold it under a lot of scrutiny, because we hear advice from different people that say, if you want to be successful in life, then you need to follow your passion. But then we hear other people who say, following your passion is not a smart thing to do. You need to find something that you're good at and do that instead. So is it binary? I mean, is it one or the other? What are we supposed to do about it? And so first, the definition of passion is strong and barely controllable emotion. Well, I'm passionate about a lot of stuff. That's the definition. I'm passionate about a lot of stuff. I was passionate about when my daughters were born. I don't know if I ever want to be in that situation that often. In a hotel room with a big light and the crew, the cinder block walls and all that stuff. I don't probably make it sound like my wife gave birth in a dungeon, but it was just, But what I'm trying to say is that I'm passionate about my daughters, and having, when they were born, it was amazing, but I don't want to be in that situation over and over and over and over again. Similarly, music will give me a strong and barely controllable emotion, but if I sit there and I listen to music for the entire day, I am not being productive, not contributing to society. So, if I were to follow I guess more generally speaking, if I was to follow my passion for some things, then it may lead to undesirable consequences. So I think that it should be contextualized. But even then, what if the stuff that I'm passionate about, and for example, I thought in high school legitimately about foregoing college and pursuing a career in music. And I don't mean a professional musician like in an orchestra. I mean, I wanted a band, and I wanted to play it at local venues, and then I wanted to be discovered and make an EP and an LP and break and be on the radio and all that stuff. But that is not conducive to the lifestyle that I really want to live either. So, and if it was would that mean that everyone else in my life takes a back seat? My wife and my kids become secondary? Would I have gotten married? Would I have had kids? I don't know. But I know that given what I know now, had I done that, my life would have turned out the way that it had. And I think it raises a question of if everyone else in my life was to take a back seat for me to pursue everything I was passionate about, that might result in my being selfish in some cases, not all cases. So here is, with respect to work, the way that I have been able to define passion is the intersection of what you love doing, people that you can serve, or how you can serve, and then what it provides for you. And so from there, I want to stay as close to the intersection of those three as possible. That doesn't mean I'm going to stand in the center of being able to do what I love and serving other people and being able to provide for my family. I can't stay in the dead center of that all the time. Sometimes I'm going to be, if I work late, I might be stepping a little bit aside from my family. But I'm also, this may help me provide a little bit more for a triple vacation or something like that. Sometimes I'm going to be working on projects that I grow to hate. So I'm taking a step back from what I love just to get this project done. But I'm still pretty close to doing what I want to be doing. And so I think that whenever you have, and I'm not saying this is the definition that everyone should follow, but this is the definition that I have found to work for the things that I do for a living and what I want out of my life. Now, for me, in terms of where WordPress fits in all of this, I have multiple passions. I have a passion for blogging. I have a passion for software development. And I have a passion for self-employment. I didn't think that I would have as much passion about business, but it has grown over the years. And WordPress is at the intersection of all of those. Now, WordPress does not allow me to play the guitar. It does not allow me to record music. It doesn't allow me to do anything with my kids. It doesn't allow me to go for runs. It doesn't allow me to do a lot of other things that I'm passionate about. So I'm passionate about it with respect to some things, and I'm trying to, but it doesn't make sense for me to follow it in the context of my other passions. So when someone says, hey, you should follow your passion, I think that it's important to contextualize that in terms of follow something that you're passionate about, that you're good at, that provides for your family, that will allow you to serve others, and that would allow you to love as much as possible what you're able to do. So, everyone's passions differ, and not only do our passions differ, but I think that we're passionate in different ways or in varying degrees. So, I mean, what are the various passions that exist around WordPress? It can be blogging, development. I know one company who's passionate about maintenance. Their entire business model is built around fixing warped installations of WordPress, or not even that, but basically providing customer service when people have any type of question about WordPress, no matter how complicated or how simple it may seem. Some people who are passionate about hosting. The last thing I ever want to do is ever be responsible for maintaining a rack of servers that house people's blogs, because blogs are extraordinarily personal, or they're extraordinarily profitable to your business. I don't want to be responsible for that. But, I mean, what else? There's so many facets regarding WordPress and regarding what it can do for us and regarding the other tertiary tools and the tertiary systems that are based around it that other people are going to be passionate about. So the question that I always ask other people is when they tell me, hey, I want to do something with WordPress. I want to set up a business around WordPress. And this assumes that they have an idea as to what they want to do. The question that always comes up is that, well, will you love what you're doing over the long term? Will you love what you're doing from, you get up in the morning to whenever you decide to call it a day, you're going to love what you're doing? And then are you going to be able to serve other people in some capacity? I mean, businesses exist to provide some